And as the country celebrates Australia Day here, a public holiday often marked by barbecues and various community events, it's also a time to reflect on the nation's identity. One of Australia's most eminent neurosurgeons, Dr. Charlie Teo, appealed in his Australia Day address earlier this week for greater tolerance of immigrants. I spoke to him later from his hospital office. Dr. Teo, what does Australia Day mean to you?
Well, I guess it's a good time for everyone to appreciate what we've got here. It's something that I didn't quite appreciate, until I went overseas and lived in another country for 10 years. And then when I came back, I really then embraced everything Australian and appreciated what we had. Some of the things that I didn't appreciate before I'd actually lived overseas. You
did spend several years working in America. How do you think that changed your views on the issue of racism and Australia's immigration policies?
When I left Australia, I knew that it was a racist towards Asians. And when I went to America, there was virtually no racism towards Asians. Of course, there was racism against African Americans, but I didn't experience any at all there for the whole 10 years I was there. When I came back, I was pleasantly surprised that things had improved dramatically. But the point I tried to make in my speech is that it hasn't disappeared, and I don't think racism in any form or whatever degree should be acceptable.
Have you experienced racism in Australia, and why do you think it does exist here?
Answer to the first question, yes. Again, it was very overt when I left for America a couple of decades ago. And it's, I guess, not as overt now, but there's still covert racism against Asians and against me in particular. No, I haven't experienced much at all, maybe one or two incidents in 10 years, so dramatically better. But I have seen racism against other people of ethnic origin here in Australia in the last 10 years. Why it should happen, I don't know, Heather, but I guess it could be a product of our isolation. It could be a product of what we believe is the typical Australian, and people's people haven't realised, and in fact the typical Australian has changed.
Do you think racism in Australia can go both ways?
Yeah, absolutely. Racism goes both ways. Chinese are very racist, and my mother used to be quite racist against you whiteys. And I know that Japanese are quite racist against Chinese, Chinese against Japanese. So it absolutely goes both ways. But again, it doesn't excuse it at all.
At one point, you actually felt the intake of Chinese to Australia should be limited. Were you in that category as well in some ways?
Oh, absolutely, Heather. I was in the category of being someone who wasn't mature enough to realise the benefit of immigration and the advantages to a nation of immigration. I was immature. And I thought that by keeping us isolated and restricted, that we would maintain our so-called utopia. What I didn't realise until I went to America, that by embracing immigrants, accepting them into your communities, it's going to enrich your community in the long run.
A feature of your speech is the call for Australia to meet its social and moral obligations to show more kindness towards refugees here. Why have you taken that focus?
It's because it's a generic sweeping statement, Heather. I mean, I've thought about the issue so much. I'd love to give more specific direction to those who make the laws and determine our input of refugees. But I can't, I actually agree, well, not so much agree, but I understand both sides of the argument. You can't just have open slather. You can't let everyone in, and you can't be restrictive to people who are really in dire need of a country to live in to escape their political persecution or the violence from their own countries. So there's got to be a compromise, and I figure if we all start off with the basic premise of kindness, that these people are good people in general, that these people are going to benefit our society, that we should be more tolerant and kinder in our approach to them, then maybe the legislation will follow from both sides of the fence.
You're calling for bipartisanship on this, and yet talks this week between the government and the opposition have collapsed. Does that reinforce just how difficult it is to resolve this?
Yeah, that's exactly what it does. It reinforces the fact that we haven't been able to come to some sort of compromise or common thread in the last decade, and as a result of that, people are dying. Not only are people dying, but we are not benefiting from those good people that could be allowed into our country. and we're turning people against us. We are a talk of the world. Other nations are using us as an example of unkindness, and we've got to stop that. I'd like Australia to be seen as a kind nation who actually took the high road.
It's clearly a difficult political issue. What would be your solution, or even a first step?
I will humbly suggest that the two major parties have to drop their animosity and antagonism and come to some compromise on this. I mean, it just has to be bipartisan. And I think if the leaders of both parties showed that level of maturity where they can drop the popularity game and drop their posturing and their egos and all those other things that make politicians sometimes determine legislation, I think we will benefit from their leadership by showing that they're getting together to address this very big problem.
So what would you regard as the essence of your Australia Day message?
I guess if I had to identify the essence of my Australia Day message, it was the fact that I want people to be more appreciative of Australia, including myself. I am in many ways the prodigal son. I loved Australia, but I didn't quite appreciate it. I went overseas, I came back, I realised that this is absolutely the greatest nation in the world. So here I am, a Chinaman, accepted as being a great Australian, and that's the message. I want people to know that Australians are no longer the beer drinking, cricket playing, board short wearing white Caucasian. An Australian now is a Lebanese builder or a Chinese doctor or a Vietnamese designer. That is the essence of Australia. It's a melting pot. If we exhibit a whole lot more kindness to our fellow man here and around the world, then Australia will be a better place and the world will be a better place.
Well, Dr. Teo, happy Australia Day and thanks very much for joining us.
No, thank you, Heather.